What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the Brant Partial Show. So I wanted to preview the Oregon-Washington game. Man, this is gonna be a really good game, and this is a matchup. I think this is a matchup where it's not just. I think when you think Oregon, Washington, seventh ranked team, eighth ranked team. I think in years past you think, oh, this is going to be whoever wins this is going to win the Pac-12, and then that's just end of story. What's cool about this matchup is. We're talking about a game where the winner of this game, could seriously continue to propel their momentum towards getting in the college football playoff. So I'm excited for this one. And these are two teams, you think of Oregon and you always, if you're older, like if you're in your 20s or later, you remember the Chip Kelly era at Oregon. You think of high flying, fast speed offense, this 2023 version of Oregon under Dan Lanning has a little bit of that, but it also has, hey, we want to play strong physical football, running the ball. We want to win the line of scrimmage. We don't just want to beat you by putting up more points than you. We want to beat you up physically, and we want to have the edge on both sides of the line of scrimmage. So that's what I like about Oregon team. But don't get it twisted. Washington has a little bit of that too. Washington, if you look at last year too, this year as well, their offensive line play has been exceptional. Look at Michael Penix has played high-level football even going back to 2020 at Indiana, but, Washington has been so successful because they have been so strong on the offensive line. So this game has the makings to be a really good game, close in the fourth quarter. Maybe the team that has the ball last wins this game. So I'm super pumped, super excited. For Oregon and Washington, a battle of two top 10 teams. This is going to be a super, super fun matchup. Yeah, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, the quarterback matchup might be two guys that we might be talking about as top 5 picks in this next upcoming draft. So yeah, this one is going to be fun. And when's the last time we've had a real marquee matchup in the Pac-12 where there is legit not only Pac-12 implications, Pac-12 championship implications, but national title and college football playoff title or college football playoff implications? Pac-12 team. When is the last time a Pac-12 team has made the play? Was Washington 2016? Was that the last time a Pac-12 team has made the playoff? It has been a few years. So Washington, Oregon. I think what's interesting about Washington and Oregon. So USC was my pick to win the Pac-12, but initially it was Washington. What's interesting about this game is what's interesting about these two teams though. These were two teams where there's always a team every year that. In the back of my mind, I think they're going to be a national title potential team that could, one loss, run the table, get, to me, I'm trying to think of the last time we've had a team like, or a good example would be in recent years. I guess maybe, what was it? 20, I guess, not as much. I guess I would say maybe Georgia a little bit in 2021, but the example, 2013 Florida State to me was that team. But for me, Washington and Oregon were both those teams. I'd say especially Washington was that team where I'd be like, wasn't really ready to put my fist down and pick them to win, to go to the playoff, but I was like. There was part of me that was like, if Washington starts off this season in a win Saturday, if Washington start off next season like 7-6-0, 7-0, 8-0, would I in people and getting buzz about being a play, not just a conference title contender, but a playoff contender? Would I be surprised? No. So I think Washington is that team where they are a win here. Is really going to get the buzz, and you're really going to get the talk that, this Washington team not only can win the Pac-12, but it can also be a team that gets in the playoff and is going to be a really tough, not just a tough out, but a team that, check all the boxes where they might be able to win not only a game in the playoff, but win a national championship. As you look at that showing Washington, the way they beat Michigan State, that was, when you look at teams that have won the national championship, they really have an early, obviously they have a long way to go. They first have to win the conference title well, you could argue they don't, but most likely have to win the conference title to be in the discussion of a national title, but a title contender. But what's interesting about Washington is what'll be interesting with Washington is I lost my train of thought, but I guess the point with Washington is they are, they check all the boxes to win a national title, and I guess a lot of now I remember what I was going to say. So a team like Washington, if they win big against, like if they beat Oregon handily, I think then you're like, that really is going to put people all on board of the Washington train. I think a lot of teams that have won a national title start out with, back to what I was saying, the way they beat Michigan State, that is kind of like that was just a complete outclassing. And you look at national champions, they've had a lot of times they will have many games where, at least one game where they just completely outclass a respected Power 5 opponent. So that's the thing. I think, which you look at Georgia, Georgia the last 2 years, there's been games, SEC teams, they've just completely outclassed. Washington completely outclassed Michigan State. Alabama, the years they've won it, outclassed some opponents. So Washington has really had that game where they have really put their fist down and made a statement to people that they are a strong, very well-rounded football team. And you look at Washington, Braylon Trice is probably the most underrated. Well, maybe not underrated is the best word, but he's not getting enough hype relative to how dominant he's been last year and then is continuing that trend this year. So you got an edge rusher that's very good, could be a top 10 pick. You got a quarterback that could be a top 5 pick, maybe a top 3 pick. You got a first-round receiver potentially. You got multiple talented receivers. You got a defense that's playing good football, a good young coach who has his team on the right track. So Washington, everything is there for them to be a really strong team, not only this year but down the road. And if they get in the playoff this year, maybe this is a team where we could be talking about year in and year out could be not just a conference title contender but a playoff title contender. Obviously, a lot can happen between now, though. We are still early. It's still early in the season, but Washington has their chance to really make a statement tomorrow. Or Saturday, excuse me. So then we'll talk about the flip side with Oregon. So Oregon, Bo Nix. Bo Nix is my second favorite quarterback for the 2024 draft. I really love Bo Nix's game. I think he's an outstanding talent. I think he's a super good quarterback. But yeah, Dan Lanning just seems like a coach who, he talks about good is the enemy of great. I think he really has visions on turning Oregon into a powerhouse nationally. So the way in Oregon just seems like they've a program that just seems to naturally have playmakers on offense, even in whether it's whether it was Mark Helfrich taking over for Chip Kelly, Mario Cristobal. It seems like they've been able to still establish. They've gotten some luck, getting good coaches. Dan Lanning, a really good coach. Mario Cristobal was a really good coach. He was a little bit of a question mark, just a guy that was not really a proven track record of success, but that worked out. Helfrich didn't work out, but there was flashes for about a year or two. The offense remained playing at a high level. So Oregon, no matter how down things had become, they found a way to recruit fairly well, especially under Dan Lanning, and they found a way to keep playmakers on the football team. But yeah, I think Dan Lanning, I think he is a really nice fit for the job. I think him and Kalen DeVore, why this matchup's going to be so great is these are two guys that, you feel like this is only, I guess what I'm trying to say is this might only be a preview of how great a success they could have at these programs. These guys are really kind of the next guys up to potentially become some of the next elite coaches. With Saban getting older, Kirby Smart still, fairly young, but not not a super young guy. Urban Meyer has been out of college football for 5 years, and then Mac Brown, an older coach. You feel like you look at who are the top guys, top young guys that are ready to break through to that elite level. Dan Lanning, Kalen DeBoer. So yeah, this I could talk about this matchup even longer, but I'll just leave it at this one's going to be fun, and this one is going to say a lot about these two teams. And the loser of this game, let's say hypothetically, because Washington and Oregon, they're both in the North, I believe they couldn't meet in the conference title. So I'd say, could we have two Pac-12 teams if Washington wins this game and goes undefeated somehow, or has one loss, do they get in? But if Oregon just has this one loss, is that the case for two Pac-12 teams? It could be interesting. With so, like, and then USC, that's the thing. We haven't had a Pac-12 team in a playoff in a long time, and then now maybe we could see two. And it makes you wonder, Michigan, Ohio State, what happens there? Is that another, both of those two running the table again and meeting and having, Ohio State having one loss or Michigan having one loss, that's kind of that's not a very likely scenario to happen 2 years in a row, but anything is possible. And then the SEC, Georgia, I think, even though I argue that LSU's not out of there, that could be the problem for LSU down the road. If you have two Pac-12 teams fighting, if you have a Michigan, Ohio State, even the big, Texas, Oklahoma, it's interesting. There's about 6 teams, Florida State, 6, 7 teams that I really like at this point. So that leads me to the next thing. It's really cool to see the college football rankings with traditional powerhouses ranked in the top 10. I think that's really cool to see. USC, Alabama. I know Bama's been in there, but Texas, Oklahoma. It's really cool to see the traditional schools in the top 10. Oregon, and then even Washington, you could argue, is a traditional power. So yeah, Michigan, Georgia. It is really cool to see a poll with all the top teams in the country in the top 10. I think that's really cool. So let's talk about Michigan. So Michigan coming into this year, the expectation was to go out, obliterate the 3 non-conference teams, which they've done so, beat, and then just roll through the Big Ten. And 3 Big Ten opponents in, Rutgers, Nebraska, and now Minnesota, they have just run through, beaten handily with no problem. So Michigan, that's what you got to love under Jim Harbaugh at this point. Michigan is just doing exactly what they need to do. And it's not always, I'll say this about their games, it has not been like overly flashy the way they've won. It's not like the Nebraska game, the Minnesota game, like they pulled away, but it was kind of, they kind of slow. It's kind of a slow pull away. It's not like they just emphatically, there's not just like avalanches of scoring. They just kind of slowly grind you away, slowly pull away, touchdown, a couple minutes later, touchdown, key stop. Oh, here's a turnover, key turnover. Oh, we couple run plays, run some clock, score. So Michigan doing a really good job of continuing to do what they've needed to do. But yeah, I think Michigan, just a really good team. I think their defense has been outstanding. I think Will Johnson is one of the best corners in college football, whether people realize it or not. He's just an outstanding player. Josh Wallace has done a really nice job out there. Chris Jenkins, excellent defensive lineman. I thought this Minnesota game, I thought Minnesota might give them problems, but that really wasn't the case. Michigan just went out, executed, played at a high level. McCarthy's just been doing a really good job for him, so it's really cool to see. But yeah, so and it appears Alabama's not out of it. Alabama. If you watch Alabama, and it's just I think you really see kind of the effect other programs having success in recruiting has had, because Alabama just doesn't. You look a few years ago, I think that was kind of the peak. Like if you look at the 2017 Alabama championship, 2020, those were really, 20 was a little bit of a weird year because we're in the midst of COVID. A lot of teams were, without some guys, missing guys some weeks. But if you look at those championships in 2017, 2020, even in 2016 when they lost in the championship, and 2018 when they lost in the championship, you look at, especially 2016 through 2018, you look, Alabama really was, they were just dominating recruiting at such a high level, bringing in just such high-end level talent, just about on every position group. And now, with Georgia improved in recruiting, and Oregon improved in recruiting, and Michigan doing a good job in recruiting, and Ohio State doing a great job in recruiting, especially mostly at the skill position. I think that has had an effect on Alabama. Alabama, the way, and I think it's indicative in the way they're winning games. They're winning games by just purely, they're winning games by just purely executing at a high level. They, this is not, Alabama is not really anymore. We're just going to go out, and by the third quarter, it's already 31-0 or 31-10, because we have just really imposed our will. We've made so many big plays. It's now, okay, we got to go out. We have to really play crisp, play clean, avoid big plays, avoid turnovers. We really have to just, because we're not, teams have closed the gap talent-wise on us. Even Sarkisian in Texas, if you look at, even though Texas has always had talent, if Alabama would have played Texas between 2016 and 2018, even though Texas a couple times, what year was it, they had a decent team, I think those would have been blowouts. Now it's, even though you could argue Alabama still probably has the edge if you look overall, top to bottom, their roster and they're too deep. Alabama probably has the slight edge. Texas gotten better at the skill position. They've gotten better in the trenches. So a lot of teams have really closed the gap in every regard on Alabama. But yeah, let's talk about, it's too bad with Ole Miss. It's too bad Ole Miss lost to Alabama, because that win over LSU, you feel like Ole Miss could have really made some noise down the road. So it's too bad they lost that game. USC. So we'll talk about, USC. I think Arizona, USC barely escaped Arizona. Arizona, I'll say this. Arizona is that team this year that people, it's kind of funny with college football when a team's been bad for multiple years. Like Arizona, what is Arizona, 3-3 right now? People just assume, they look at the 3-3 record kind of with blinders on. They don't really, they kind of look at the 3-3 record and don't really take anything positive away from it, if you will. It's more so that, but the thing about Arizona, they are a very good 500 ball club. Like that is, Arizona a couple years ago was just a non, especially 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago where they didn't win a game or won one game? Arizona really was a complete non-competitor, not only in the conference but out of conference. But now Arizona, under Jed Fish, he's done a good job of bringing in playmakers, getting this offense to play and execute at a high level. So you got to credit what Jed Fish has done in Arizona. He's done an excellent job, and they have playmakers, guys like Jacob Cowan. I think it's interesting. It's like kind of ironic that Arizona played USC so tough because a lot of USC had multiple guys transfer from Arizona. Keon Barnes, Christian Roland Wallace. They had several. Arizona lost several key players. Paris Shan too to LSU. Arizona lost some key guys in the transfer portal, and they still have found a way to perform at a high level. But yeah, Arizona, a good, strong program, or tends to be trending to become a good, strong program, and Jed Fish deserves a lot of credit for that. But yeah, I'll say that Texas A&M's quietly surprised me this year. I'll really say that about A&M. I really did not think this would be a great team. I think you really have to say, I think, with the way A&M's play this year, you really have to say that Jimbo Fisher is a good coach. He really is a good football coach. There's a reason why, he's a guy that I was doubting very much before this season, but he's a guy that, to me, this season kind of reminds me of how he won a national championship. He's a guy that just, this year, they don't do much in the transfer portal. The recruiting class isn't as high a level compared to a couple years ago. This, all things going against Texas A&M, and they're still done a really good job of winning some games. Now, I know they've lost 2 games, but the way they lost those 2 games, really not that bad. They had opportunities against Miami. Hard-fought game. They just lost against Alabama. Beat Auburn pretty handily. So Texas A&M, unless things really fall off the rails, I don't think I would move on for Jimbo Fisher. I think this year has really reminded people that he can coach football, and that he, I think they missed on some guys in recruiting. I think some of those guys were a little overrated. But Evan Stewart is certainly a guy they hit on. See why they wanted Evan Stewart. I think if you're Texas A&M, I think it's really tough to realize you could have had Harold Perkins. I think that's a tough blow. But even if you had him, I don't know how much of a difference that would make this year. But you feel like A&M missed. Even as great as the recruiting class, some of those guys maybe a little overhyped, and there were some guys that probably would have been, better fits, or probably would have really helped them win some more games. So I don't think, to me, I don't think Jimbo Fisher is as great. I think the thing I thought he was strong at, recruiting, might actually be the thing he's actually weaker at, if that makes sense. Because if you look at Florida State, it's kind of hard to whiff on guys if you're coaching at the Florida schools, just because there's just always so many guys that come out of the state of Florida that are good, that are going to produce in college and be NFL caliber guys. When you're at Texas A&M, you're fighting for guys. You're fighting against the other Texas schools. You're fighting against Alabama. You're fighting against Kirby Smart. You're fighting against the other schools in the South. Against and that's the thing. You look at guys that Alabama and Georgia recruit. They're guys that I watch their highlight, and I'm more impressed than some of the guys that they don't offer that are high recruits. So to me, that tells me that some guys, some programs either know what they're doing and know how to evaluate guys, or they don't. To me, that guy is Billy Napier. I think Billy Napier, Florida this year, I think Florida, even if this year even if they only improve their win-loss by 1 or 2 games, I think Florida next year is really going to be a team that's ready to take off. I think Billy Napier understood. I don't think, Graham Mertz is not a bad quarterback, but he's not Graham Mertz, I don't know if he has eligibility for next year, but I don't think he is the solution long-term for Florida. I don't think he'll be the guy next year, even if he does try to come back. I think they'll have to try to do something, whether it's recruiting or whether they try to get a guy in the transfer portal. But Billy Napier knows how to recruit. I look at some of his recruits, and I'm really wowed by some of the guys they brought in. Some of these guys are playing now. Miguel Mitchell, Shamar James. He's a really good player. Florida's defense has not really played as well as a cohesive unit, I've hoped, but they do have a good core nucleus of young guys that you got to believe next year, when most of those guys are sophomores, juniors, another step to get better, and then another incoming class. So that's the thing. When you can recruit, if you are a good recruiter, if you feel like, even if Bailey Napier is not the best coach X's and O's wise, you feel like just the way he's recruiting, you feel like in year 3 or 4, one of those years, it's going to click. Now, when a guy's a really good recruiter and knows the traits to look for, you could argue that Billy Napier might not last a whole long time at Florida just because you feel like if you whiff on if you have a mass exodus of guys in the NFL draft and you have a recruiting class that's you don't get as many guys you want, then there'll be some years you're kind of lacking for talent. But years 3, 4 of Billy Napier, when he gets a bunch of guys that can play, at least I think they can play. They all have a lot of the traits, explosiveness that I look for. So that's kind of the hope for Florida and Billy Napier. So Ohio State with a big win over Maryland. Ohio State, that was the way they play. The win over Maryland is kind of that's the expectation that Ohio State fans have. That Ohio State, I think under Ryan Day, it was starting to get like this under Urban Meyer, but under Ryan Day, I think Ohio State fans have the expectation that Ohio State they're going to roll every Big Ten team. Now, Ohio State built in such a way of high scoring, to put up points, win on the outside. Our guy's better than your guy at receiver. A lot of weeks that'll work, but there's some weeks, just because Ohio State not making the emphasis of being an effective running team and not being as physical at the line of scrimmage, whether that's both sides. With those things being true, that is the case for teams playing Ohio State a little bit tighter than Buckeyes fans want it to be. Let's talk about Clemson. So Clemson, this year, I think really what you've seen from Clemson is the effect of no Trevor Lawrence to Deshaun Watson. You kind of get the feel Clemson was one of those programs that I don't necessarily want to say lucky, but in a sense it kind of was luck that, I think it was more so Dabo's a really good coach, and they hit on a bunch of they got some NFL guys. They know what they're doing in recruiting. But I think that period when Clemson was really riding high, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, like what are the odds you get 2 NFL caliber quarterbacks back to back? And then just the NFL talent. And then a couple years you have all those guys on the NFL caliber guys on the defensive line. I think Clemson they're kind of in the same boat of Alabama as we've missed out on. We're not getting the NFL caliber quarterbacks and some of the NFL caliber players at every position. We still have a handful of guys like, Clemson's going to have, Barrett Carter's one of the better linebackers. Clemson still has, Xavier Thomas is a strong defensive lineman. Clemson still has NFL caliber players. Nate Wiggins at corner, Mukaba at safety, but they don't have. They're really thirsting for that NFL caliber quarterback. Not that Cade Klubnik can't play in the NFL, but is he a guy that's going to go in the NFL and have the success of Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson down the road? Probably not. So, yeah, Clemson still has NFL caliber players, but just not quite to the level they did when they won the national championship. And I know you can't have those caliber of guys every year, but if Dabo Swinney, I think that if Dabo Swinney was really that elite of a coach, I think that they probably could overcome. I think what's safe to say, Dabo Swinney's a good coach, a very good to very good coach. I think he's a really good motivator. I think guys really enjoy playing for him, can really rally around him, and I think in game he can fire them up. I think those are the strengths of him as a coach. But to say he's elite enough, X's and O's motivational guy to overcome not having an NFL caliber quarterback and not having as strong of NFL players on both sides of the ball, I don't think he's a guy that's a good enough coach to really overcome some of those things, and the rest of the country, improving in recruiting. So I think those are some of the things that are holding Clemson football back. But yeah, Clemson's still a really good team, I think. Florida State. So we'll shift to talking about Florida State for a minute. I think Florida State, unfortunately for Florida State, I have a bad feeling they're going to lose a game down the road. Now they may not, but this Florida State team. I'll say this about this team: this is a team where I think losing a game might be the best thing for them, because this, to me, strikes me as a hungry team. They got a good quarterback. They got NFL difference makers on both sides of the ball, especially at wide receiver, along the defensive line. Not as much so at the linebacker in the secondary, but Jared Verse in the defensive line, Keon Coleman making a case for maybe the second best receiver in the country. So with that being said, Florida State has enough guys where I think, they have enough guys where, I think that if they do lose a game, I think that could utterly, get them refocused and continue, and it can really help them down the road. Because, you get the feel that the team's probably going to drop a game by, if there's early close games, and Florida State has had some early close games against Clemson and then against Boston College. So to me, that's what's worrisome about this Florida State team, is you can't just, you can only win close for so long. Eventually, something's going to go your way. You're going to have a fumble late. You're going to throw a pick. So Florida State, the worry is they're going to lose a game that they probably shouldn't. But it might not happen. But just, by chance, there is a good chance it could happen. But Florida State, an excellent football team. I think Mike Norvell's a really good coach. I think his play calling has been, excellent. Especially in the LSU game, his play calling was outstanding. The way they, the Clemson game had all the makings for them to lose that game, and then somehow they found a way to win that game in overtime, and Coleman made a play. So that really, the Clemson game really shows, really flashed what a championship team has. I've noticed that when teams that have won a championship, they have a game where it looks like they are going to lose. It looks like, even though it's close, you get the feel like, too many things are going against them to win that game. To me, the way they pulled it out against Clemson, I think, was just a classic example of a championship team just digging deeper and finding a way to get it done. And I think that was exactly what a championship team needs to do. And they had their playmakers step up and make a play. But yeah, I mean, Florida State, you talked about, their offensive line improving, I think, has been critical to the success of this team. This was an offensive line where, if you look at Florida State, it's been years they've really been longing for not just NFL caliber guys on the offensive line, but just guys that are good enough where they can really come together and create a strong, cohesive unit. Jeremiah Byers has been really good, the transfer from UTEP, and the guys in the interior have been strong too. So Florida State did what they needed to do in the offseason and through recruiting to really bring in a strong offensive line. So, yeah, Florida State, the worry is they'll drop a game down the road. But the bottom line for Florida State, difference makers on both sides of the ball. Mike Norvell and Florida State just seem like a hungry team. But yeah, so we'll talk Georgia a little bit. So Georgia, a really strong team this year. Georgia, Kirby Smart. That win over Kentucky was the way they won that game really was exactly the way they needed to win that game. And what I mean by that is, you're kind of against South Carolina, you're heavy favorites, and you let South Carolina kind of hang around. You don't really bury them like most people or like you should. And then, Auburn plays you tough. So now you're thinking, okay, Kentucky, another tough team. Do we go out and do we kind of almost play not to lose? Oh, wait, we go out. Oh, wait, they went out, took care of business, beat a Kentucky team with a lot of confidence, riding high, and really just beat the brakes off them. And Brock Bowers is such a strong part of this offense. So I think that game was really crucial to Georgia really believing again and continuing to build momentum as we get closer towards the middle end of the season, building momentum and belief that this team can win another championship. So yeah, big win for Georgia, and yeah, Georgia. I think this point of the season, with all things we've seen from Georgia, I think you can answer that question. Yes, this is a team that can win a third straight national championship, and Brock Bowers is just an absolute beast, and he's a guy that can be counted on to make plays down the stretch. Likes the big moment. Whether it's week 1 against Clemson in 2021 as a true freshman, whether it's the national championship against TCU, whether it's the Orange Bowl against Michigan, Brock Bowers steps up in big-time games, makes big-time plays, not only in big-time games but late in games. So Brock Bowers, that's what they talk about, the announcers. This guy really shows people why he is an All-American tight end. But yeah, Georgia defense kind of reminds me of a little bit like their defense last year. Even though they lose some guys, they had enough guys back, and they have enough young guys to mix in with the returning guys, where you don't really see the drop off. Really is not really evident. You look at Starks, Bullard, Michael Williams. There's a lot of capable guys, even though you lose Jalen Carter, Ringo, some guys on the defense that were really good. Yet enough guys are back, and enough young talented guys like Michael Williams, Stackhouse, where it all comes together to really produce another strong defense. But yeah, Georgia, a program that's really built to sustain success long term, in my opinion. That really, really strong team, and I think they're going to be really good under Kirby Smart for a long time. And even if they don't win the national championship this year, you got to believe Smart is going to get one more down the road. But to me, though, I think people are really watching to see if Georgia is going to three-peat for a multitude of reasons. Number one, it's just so hard to three-peat. And the second reason is, the second reason being, if they don't do it this year, how much of a belief does that give teams around the country? Because can you imagine I know we talk a lot of hypothetical and a lot of situations down the road in this channel, but can you imagine how deflating that'll be to a lot of programs, and how that'll affect recruiting if Georgia does three-peat this year? I think that'll be like, if you're, for example, we talk about Washington maybe as a team that's going to make the playoff this year for not the first time, but the first time in a while, and the first time representing a Pac-12 team in a while. You talk about, say, Georgia played Washington in the first round. I think that game would give similar intrigue to Michigan, Georgia 2020, 2021, 2022. That would give similar intrigue, but also, if Georgia went out and obliterated Washington, I think a lot of people it'd leave a lot of question marks, or it'd leave a lot of people scratching their heads saying, man, is Georgia just the team that, like, you talk about, are they going to, like, you're probably not saying, you're not penciling them into 4-peat, but are people talking about, like, man, is Georgia just that new Alabama? Is Georgia just that new team that's just going to be, that is just going to destroy dynasties? Because that's one thing I was talking about with my dad. The Alabama dynasty, I think why people don't like Alabama so much is Alabama really destroyed two dynasties back to back in the same season. Florida in the SEC championship. That 2009 season, Florida was kind of heading towards, if Florida wins that's 3 out of 4. That is just crazy. That's some, pretty wild stuff there. And Alabama derails that. I guess the same could be said with Clemson, though. Clemson had a chance to win 3 of 4 as well, and they didn't do so. So I think that, that getting that third one, not only 3 in 3 years, but 3 in 4 years. So I think it's just so hard to do because, you're talking about, I'm kind of getting sidetracked here, but you're talking about doing something that is so hard to do. And it's one of those, like Clemson, if they would have won that national title in 19, now you're talking about, is Clemson the new, biggest, bully in college football? And they were dethroned by LSU. And then Alabama in Alabama in 2018, if they win that, then that would have been 2 of 3. And then in 23 of 4, but obviously they didn't win it in 18. So that's the thing in this 4-year span, 3 in 3 years is tough, but in a 4-year span, so Kirby Smart obviously would still have, since he's won 2 in a row, would still have another 2-year window to do that, the 3 to 4. But yeah, I think if someone were to knock off Georgia, especially if it was a Pac-12 team, if Washington were to do so, I think that would give a lot of confidence to the rest of the country. And I think it'd bring a lot of popularity, or I think it'd give a lot of people hope across the nation. Because you look at, I'm amazed by these YouTube streams, how many people are watching some of these games. Like I'm watching, what was it? I think it was the end of the Ole Miss LSU, and there's 52,000 people watching that stream, and I'm just thinking, wow, that is just a lot of people watching the stream. And yeah, it is. It's just crazy. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I think Georgia Washington. The more I think about it, I think that would be an outstanding matchup. I really think the way Washington played against Michigan State, I think that might be a glimpse for people of the way they dominated Michigan State. That could be a glimpse of, them matching up with Georgia. But yeah, I think it's kind of crazy. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how dynasties, Alabama kind of destroyed many dynasties. You look at, if Florida wins the national title in 2009, maybe is the next year still pretty rough like it was. I mean, I say rough 8-5 for them, but yeah, that it is it's interesting, and yeah, what the talk will be if Georgia is to three-peat, I think will be very, very interesting. But I guess even though I was just kind of pumping up Georgia, you kind of get the feel they don't have that ability to really turn it on and be completely, utterly dominant like they were the last 2 seasons. I think that you kind of get the feel this year they've kind of really start to felt the effect of all the mass the mass amount of guys lost to the NFL draft. So, but yeah, Georgia, bottom line, certainly has a chance to three-peat. So we'll talk Colorado. So Colorado, 4-2 right now, and if you had a time machine and you could just fast forward until now, and you saw Colorado was 4-2, I think you'd probably be thinking about the same. You'd have about the same reaction as if you had watched their 6 games this so far. And what I mean by that is, I think that, I think the way, if you look at Colorado overall right now, I think the one word to describe their season is satisfying. Even though satisfying might be too extreme of an adjective, to use, because those two losses, especially the loss to Oregon was pretty disappointing, to say the least. But Colorado, if you look at their record last year, if you just look at the win losses on paper, 1-11, and then now this year 4-2, and the win against Arizona State. Well, it's not necessarily a great win, because a lot of people expected them to come away victorious in that game. That's a game where, if you lose that game, then you're kind of like that. In a way, that might be more disappointing than the way they lost to Oregon, just because, now you're starting to drop. Now you've dropped 3 conference games in a row after, a 3-0 start. Now you've lost 3 conference opponents. I know I've said that twice now, but now you're really starting to now you're really starting to scratch your head and say, man, we're kind of really trending in the wrong direction. And is this going to turn into a free fall this season of losses? So, but with that win against Arizona State, now you're going against a Stanford team where, hey, we can win this one. Oh wait, Travis Hunter might be back. So Colorado, potentially, a season that could potentially was starting to get closer to falling off the rails and turning into a string of losses. Now you're kind of say, I see some light ahead. I see a path for us to start winning some games and start to be and start to make some noise. Start to remind people of the team they saw early in the season that did what they needed to do to beat TCU, played well against Nebraska, had a tremendous comeback against Colorado State, had a tremendous comeback against USC. The second half, Colorado team, you're kind of reminded of the good moments. I guess that that is probably the best way to describe the Colorado season. That's the best way to describe this Colorado season is once they start winning again now, I think you'll be reminded more of the second half Colorado against USC in the first few games. I think, I guess that's what I'm trying to state. But yeah, I think overall, even if Colorado only wins, say they only win 2 or 3 more games the rest of the season, I think this season there's a lot to respect about the way they've played. Travis Hunter coming back will be huge just because of the difference he makes on both sides of the ball. But yeah, credit Coach Prime in Colorado. 4-2 as of right now, I think is they should be pretty satisfied by what they've done. With the a minor kind of fork in the road in the loss to Oregon. But yeah, it's too bad they play Stanford. It's too bad Stanford has really fallen off as a program. It wasn't that long ago Stanford was in the mix of winning the Pac-12 title every year, and now Stanford just kind of going back to the Stanford that a lot of people remember before Jim Harbaugh got there. So kind of too bad to see. Stanford has established himself as a strong program for a long time. Now things really, the roller coaster ride it appears to be over. And yeah, it is. It's too bad to see, but you never know. Things can change. Things certainly can change. So let's talk about Texas. Texas is always fun to talk about. I think Texas, kind of the way I just talked about Colorado, that the Texas's loss to Oklahoma kind of makes me that loss kind of makes me, all the thoughts start to reoccur in your head like, oh shoot, Steve Sarkisian, is this another 8-5? Is this another season where we just don't win enough games? We just have we ravel off a few more losses that we probably shouldn't to teams not as talented as us. Those are the thoughts that really come to your mind as a Texas fan. But also, this is a game where it's like, okay, we lost to a really strong Oklahoma team, a quarterback in Dillon Gabriel who probably has a future in the National Football League, and a guy that's another one of the strong quarterbacks in the country that's going to rise in a team, Oklahoma team that's hungry, that last year, towards the end of the season, as bad as things started, got really better, or got better for them. And this is a rivalry game. So I think that, and this is a game that they had a chance to win late. So I think that is as tough as this loss was for Texas, I think it's one where, you really got to look at, use this, try to take every bit, try to take every bit of gasoline from this loss and try to use it as fuel the rest of the season to just, to keep yourself fired up and to keep winning and try to get back in the mix. So, but yeah, Oklahoma, I say sometimes I'm a year too early with some teams, and what I mean by this is, I was someone who believed Oklahoma was going to. I was someone who believed Oklahoma last year was really gonna be good. I was a big believer in Dillon Gabriel. It was interesting. I watched Dillon Gabriel's film last year of him at. I watched his film last year, and I had him ranked as. I had him up there with actually Hendon Hook. My early rankings, Hendon Hooker, Anthony Richardson, a lot of the quarterbacks were up there. I thought Dillon Gabriel would declare after this past year, but because of injuries and stuff and the team just not being as good, his stock was not at as high as it should be. But the way he played against Texas, I think Dillon Gabriel really kind of backing me up that he could be a guy who, his stock continues to soar as the season goes on, especially if Oklahoma does something special this year. But we talk about a team where I think Brent Venables, in the way Oklahoma played against Texas, and now the way they've strung a few wins in a row and the way they've looked overall this season, I think that really makes people think that Oklahoma, that really makes people kind of put the 6-6 season last year, the poor season last year, that really makes people kind of put that in the rearview mirror. That is not... that's really not in the front of people's minds right now. I think, even if Oklahoma, I think this year people were so hungry, and Oklahoma has such a high standard that they're going to win year in and year out, because Oklahoma's been a consistent program. Them, Ohio State, two of the more consistent programs. You don't see Oklahoma have two poor seasons in a row. It's just very rare. So I think that if Oklahoma, I say even if they lose this game to Texas and they're sitting at 5-1, I think then a lot of people would start to what happened last year would start to creep into people's mind. But now that they're 6-0 and now they have that big win under their belt, I think a lot of people are now, their eyes are really fully focused on what's in front of them now, and they're really kind of have tunnel vision to really believe that Oklahoma has a chance to win every game moving forward and get back to the college football playoff and become that program that can be a consistent playoff contender like they were under Lincoln Riley. So I think Brent Venables really proved a lot to a lot of people with that win. But yeah, I'm going to wrap with that. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Brant Parcell Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.